Have you ever stood in your kitchen simmering a classic bolognese or a comforting Sunday stew for over an hour, only to find that those diced tomatoes you chucked in are still sitting there like stubborn, rubbery little bricks? You poke them with your wooden spoon, you crank up the heat, but they completely refuse to melt down into a rich, velvety sauce. Instead, you end up with a watery puddle separating from weirdly intact tomato cubes. You probably thought it was your fault. Maybe you didn't cook them long enough, or maybe you bought the wrong brand. Well, I am here to tell you that you are being taken for a ride. You are not a bad cook, you are simply the victim of a multi-million-pound supermarket illusion. The stuff sitting in your pantry right now isn't just a tin of innocent chopped veg. In many cases, it is a legally engineered science project designed to look premium while saving corporate giants a fortune by the time we reach the end of this video. You will know exactly how the food industry manipulates what goes into your shopping trolley, putting you ahead of 90% of shoppers in the UK. I will show you how to spot the hidden fillers that drive up the weight of the tin without adding a single scrap of flavour. We will break down the exact chemical culprits that stop your dinner from cooking properly. And most importantly, we will expose a massive legal loophole involving high-end imports that tricks British consumers into paying double for completely basic commodity veg. Stick around, because the most shocking revelation involves a massive, highly trusted household name that you almost certainly bought during your last trip to Tesco or Sainsbury's to understand why your home-cooked meals are being sabotaged. We need to lift the lid on how the canned tomato industry actually operates. When you walk down the aisle at Asda or Morrison's, you see rows of vibrant red tins covered in pictures of sun-drenched Italian hills, old-school farms, and promises of vine-ripened perfection. It looks like pure rustic agriculture. But behind the scenes, major processors treat tomatoes less like fresh produce and more like crude oil that needs to be refined and stabilized for maximum corporate profit. The first major trick they play is manipulating the packing medium. A tin of tomatoes should ideally be filled with plump tomato flesh and a thick, rich tomato juice or puree. Instead, regulations allow companies to pack the tins with reprocessed tomato liquid or runoff water recovered during industrial processing. Imagine buying a beautiful steak, but 20% of the weight you pay for is just generic meat juices pumped back into the packet to inflate the scales. That is exactly what happens with cheap tins. You are paying premium tomato prices for what is essentially tinted industrial tap water. The second shortcut is where the real culinary sabotage happens: texture engineering. To stop cheap, over-processed tomatoes from completely disintegrating into mush during transit, factories pump them full of a chemical called calcium chloride. Think of it as a structural mortar for plant cells. It binds with the natural pectin inside the tomato, chemically locking the cell walls so the dice keeps its perfect shape. It looks great when it drops out of the tin, but it completely ruins your cooking. Real tomatoes contain natural sugars and acids that should break down, caramelize, and thicken under heat. Engineered tomatoes resist the heat entirely, leaving you with a watery sauce filled with chewy industrial cubes. Finally, there is acid correction. When massive corporations source low-grade, bland crops that didn't get enough sunshine or nutrients to develop a proper flavor, they don't discard them. They just fix it in the lab by dumping in industrial citric acid to standardize the taste and force a sharp acidity. It is a deliberate supply chain cheat code. They swap out quality farming for cheap chemistry, and they leave you to deal with the heartburn. It is simple math. Real quality costs money, whereas water, stabilizers, and acid correctors are dirt cheap. They engineer the product to line their pockets, and your dinner is the collateral damage. Let us start dragging these brands out into the open, beginning with the stuff you buy when you are trying to watch the pennies. We are looking at you, supermarket budget private labels. Think of the absolute cheapest tins you find on the bottom shelves at Asda, Morrison's or Tesco. The ones with the ultra-plain packaging that cost pennies. These private label value items are a massive gamble because of how the supply chain is structured. Supermarket chains do not own tomato farms. They put out massive manufacturing contracts to commodity processors and surplus packers, buying from whoever bids the absolute lowest price per ton. There is zero brand heritage to protect here and zero culinary reputation on the line. They compete strictly on price per ounce. Flip those tins over and look at the fine print. You will almost always find tomato juice or water listed first, followed by the classic chemical duo: calcium chloride and citric acid. If you run the drain test on these bottom-tier store brands, the results are tragic. You pour the tin into a strainer, and a massive puddle of pale, reddish water immediately drains away into your sink. What is left behind is a sad handful of weak, hollow tomato flesh that has no structural integrity left. You think you are saving money, but you are literally paying standard food prices for industrial runoff water. Buying these is the culinary equivalent of buying a cheap umbrella that flips inside out the second a gust of wind hits it. Moving up the ladder, let us talk about a massive name that dominates the British convenience sector: Bachelors. Now, while they are legendary for quick-fix tinned classic meals, their basic tinned tomato products are built entirely around commodity throughput, rather than culinary specialization. The marketing tells you about rich tomato taste and convenience for your midweek spag bowl, but the physical reality inside the tin is a completely different story. Bachelors relies heavily on large-scale industrial processing models designed for maximum shelf life and nationwide distribution consistency. When you open one of these tins, you are frequently greeted by a highly watery phase and inconsistent tomato pieces that struggle to hold any real rich flavor. They use acidity regulators and firming agents to make sure the product survives sitting in a warehouse for months on end, completely sacrificing how the product actually behaves when it hits a hot pan. If you try to reduce these down into a thick, luxurious pizza sauce, you will be standing over the hob for an hour watching steam rise, while the actual body of the sauce remains incredibly thin and weak. It is optimized for a corporate spreadsheet, not for someone who actually loves good food. If you already feel like running to your kitchen cupboard to check exactly what you bought for dinner tonight, hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started, and the deceptive marketing tricks are about to get significantly worse. Let us step into the world of luxury marketing with Napolina. This is arguably the most famous commercial tomato brand in the UK, sitting proudly on the eye-level shelves of every major supermarket from Sainsbury's to Ocado. The branding is a masterclass in Italian romance. The labels are sleek, the imagery screams heritage, and the price point tells your brain that you are buying a premium ingredient. But let us look at what you are actually getting for that extra cash. Napolina has faced real scrutiny over the years regarding the sheer volume of packing liquid used in their standard chopped ranges. When consumers look closely at the actual drained weight versus the total weight of the tin, the math simply does not add up to a premium experience. They use massive industrial puree concentration systems to artificially standardize the thickness of the filling liquid, meaning you are paying a massive premium for industrial engineering rather than pristine, unadulterated fruit. The branding implies a rustic Italian kitchen, but the actual processing screams high-volume factory efficiency. You are paying top-tier British supermarket prices for what is essentially a middle-of-the-road commodity product, wrapped in a very expensive marketing jacket. This brings us to the absolute peak of the supermarket deception. Fake San Marzano-style brands, you have definitely seen these in the premium aisles of Waitrose or M&S, or even independent local dealers. The tins are gorgeous, covered in vibrant Italian flags, illustrations of Mount Vesuvius, and grand claims of traditional volcanic soil cultivation. The text proudly screams San Marzano style in massive, elegant lettering. But if you do not know how to read the fine print, you are walking right into a legal trap. In Europe and the UK, real San Marzano tomatoes are strictly protected by law under the Protected Designation of Origin framework. This means they must be grown in a specific geographic region near Naples, under hyper-strict quality controls. However, if a clever marketing department writes the words style or alternative ambiguous phrasing on the front, they can bypass the law entirely. They take standard, mass-produced commodity tomatoes grown in massive industrial fields, dump them in a pretty tin with some volcanic graphics, and double the price. It is a brilliant logistical magic trick. The packaging forces you to assume premium geographic quality, while the actual contents deliver absolutely no such guarantee. It is a complete rip-off that exploits your desire for authentic ingredients to maximize a corporate profit margin. And now, what it was worth watching all the way through for. We have waded through the watery muck, the hidden chemicals, and the clever marketing traps. So let us talk about the absolute winners that actually deserve a spot on your kitchen shelf. These are the brands that do not rely on corporate illusions or chemical trickery to make their food look good. They simply let top-tier farming speak for itself. Our first entry is the ultimate value play champion, and it comes from a place you might not expect. Aldi and Lidl own brand premium tiers, specifically lines like Aldi Specially Selected or Lidl Deluxe. Now, do not confuse these with the ultra-cheap value tins we tore apart earlier. These specific mid-premium ranges are an absolute sleeper hit in the UK supermarket space. They are incredibly affordable, usually costing just a fraction of what the big commercial names charge, but the quality inside the tin is phenomenal. The supply chain philosophy here is entirely different from the standard budget lines. Instead of buying cheap surplus scrapings, these supermarket premium lines contract directly with reputable, high-volume Mediterranean growers who focus on high natural tomato solids. When you flip these tins around to check the back, the ingredient list is beautifully clean. Just tomatoes, tomato juice, and maybe a tiny pinch of salt. No calcium chloride, no synthetic firming agents, and no industrial acid stabilizers. If you run the classic drain test on an Aldi Specially Selected tin, you will be amazed. Hardly any watery liquid runs away into the sink. Instead, you get a dense, heavy mass of actual, rich tomato flesh. When you chuck them into a hot frying pan, they do exactly what nature intended. They soften instantly, release their natural sugars, and melt down into a gorgeous, thick base sauce within minutes. The only real downside here is availability. Because these premium store brands are so popular and cheaply priced, they frequently sell out, meaning you have to grab a dozen tins whenever you see them fully stocked on the shelves. It is a brilliant option for anyone who wants high-quality home cooking on a tight everyday budget. If you are willing to spend a little bit more for an organic option that completely respects the integrity of the fruit, you need to look for Biona Organic, which you can easily find in Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Ocado, and local health food shops across the UK. Biona did not start out as a massive corporate vegetable conglomerate trying to cut corners. They are a dedicated organic brand built around the philosophy of minimal intervention and sustainable farming. They source their fruit from carefully managed fields where the crop is allowed to ripen naturally under the sun, developing its own deep, complex sweetness and balanced acidity without any help from a laboratory. Because the raw produce is inherently excellent, Biona does not need to use any processing shortcuts. Their ingredient deck is completely immaculate. When you open a tin of Biona chopped or whole peeled tomatoes, you can instantly see and smell the difference. The aroma is fresh, vibrant, and sweet, completely lacking that sharp, metallic, chemical tang that defines the low-grade commercial brands. In the cooking pan, they perform flawlessly, collapsing naturally into a rich, velvety sauce that coats pasta beautifully. They are undeniably more expensive than your standard supermarket tin, costing around double the price of a budget option, but you can physically see and taste exactly where every single penny went. You are paying for top-tier agriculture, not corporate chemical engineering. Finally, we have the undisputed heavyweight champion of the premium category. The brand you buy when you want absolute restaurant-grade perfection and are happy to pay a premium for it, Mutti. This Italian tomato specialist from Parma is widely available across the UK in Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Tesco and Ocado, and it blows almost every other commercial import completely out of the water. Mutti does not make a massive portfolio of random canned vegetables. They do one thing and one thing only, and they have spent over a century perfecting it. Their entire sourcing model is built around ultra-tight quality standards and hyper-specific culinary processing. They work with local farmers who deliver the harvest at the absolute peak of summer sweetness, and they process the fruit within hours of picking using incredibly gentle techniques. The result is a tin that boasts an incredibly high percentage of natural tomato solids and a rich, concentrated, naturally sweet flavor that requires zero correction. When you perform the sauce collapse test on Mutti whole peeled or chopped tomatoes, the difference is night and day compared to the engineered skip list brands. They break down effortlessly, creating a luxurious, thick emulsion without a single drop of watery separation. Yes, Mutti sits at the top end of the supermarket price scale, but unlike the fake luxury brands that charge you extra for fancy volcano drawings and romantic stories, Mutti costs more because the raw ingredient is genuinely superior. It is the gold standard for British home cooks who want real, authentic results. And if you are hunting for real, authenticated San Marzano tomatoes, always skip the fancy marketing text and look for the official, stamped DOP certification seal right on the label. That is the only legal guarantee that you are getting the real geographic origin. To make sure you never get caught out in the supermarket aisle again, you need a solid set of rules to separate the real food from the corporate science experiments. Rule number 1 is the absolute golden rule of label checking. Flip the tin and look for calcium chloride. If you see this compound listed under the ingredients or firming agents, put the tin straight back on the shelf. Because those tomatoes are chemically locked to stay in rigid cubes and will completely ruin the texture of your home-cooked Italian sauces. Rule number 2 is to check for added citric acid, which is often listed simply as an acidity regulator. While a tiny amount isn't toxic, its presence in a standard tin usually signals that the manufacturer used cheap, bland, underripe crops and had to artificially rescue the flavor in a laboratory. Rule number 3 is to always look at the actual weight breakdown, specifically looking out for the drained weight rather than just the total net weight of the tin. If a brand hides the drained weight or shows a massive gap between the two numbers, you are coughing up your hard-earned British pounds for tinted industrial processing water rather than actual tomato flesh. Rule number 4 is your shield against premium marketing fraud. Never buy a tin based on words like San Marzano style or Italian tradition. Instead, look for the actual legal red and yellow protected designation of origin stamp or explicit DOP certification text on the metal, which is the only legally binding guarantee that the food inside actually came from that specific, rich volcanic soil near Naples. Rule number 5 is to avoid the ultra-cheap, bottom-shelf value white label tins from any supermarket chain unless you want your dinner to taste like metallic water, because those contracts are handed to the lowest corporate bidder with zero quality control. Rule number 6 is to buy whole peeled tomatoes instead of chopped whenever you can, because big manufacturers use their finest, most pristine whole fruits for the peeled tins, while the bruised, damaged. And subpar leftovers get tossed into the industrial chopping machines to be masked by thick filling liquids. When you sum it all up, the modern canned food industry is built entirely on a foundation of legal engineering and clever sensory deception. Major brands know that if they slap a gorgeous picture of a rustic farm on the front and use cheap chemical stabilizers on the inside, they can successfully charge you a premium price for what is essentially low-grade agricultural waste. But once you shift your thinking from buying the marketing story to reading the actual physical ingredient deck, you completely strip away their power to trick you. Stop letting giant corporations optimize their profit margins at the absolute expense of your family dinners, your hard-earned cash, and your health. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching this investigation all the way to the end. If you want to help protect your friends and family from getting ripped off on their weekly shop, please share this video with someone you know who cooks a massive batch of spaghetti bolognese or homemade chili every single week. I want to hear from you down in the comments section right now. Drop a comment telling me exactly which of these tomato brands is sitting inside your kitchen cupboard at this very moment. And let me know if you are planning to go and bin it after watching this. If you want to see